interview number 2, Mrs. Woods. Mrs. Woods, where were you born?
Gaston, Texas. And that was about, 10 miles south of town.
Mm-hmm.
Between here and the railroad that goes Westheimer.
Uh-huh. What do you remember most about your mother's family?
My mother was reared by her aunt,
Mm-hmm.
because my grandmother had passed away. Mama was only 3 years old.
Uh-huh.
And the aunt, Mrs. Hattie Morrison, had taken her. She was named for.
Mm-hmm.
And when in 1898, though, the Morrisons came to Katy,
Mm-hmm.
and they brought my mother. And my father had been brought here by his parents, the Robertses,
Mm-hmm.
Thomas Robertses. And they met up. It was mostly church back in that day and time. They had a little beginning of a community church. And then my mother was charter member along with the Morrison bunch. There were only 13 of them, but they chartered the Baptist church that is here now, which is, I guess, our largest church in the community.
Yeah.
And I don't remember too much about her family because I was a preschool child when they passed away. I never knew my father's parents at all. They died about 3 years before I was born.
Mm-hmm.
But Grandfather Roberts had been a veteran of the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're all four buried right out here. What we considered our grandparents, the Morrisons. We always called them Grandpapa and Grandmama, even though they were great uncle and great aunt. My grandfather Roberts, though, is a veteran of the Civil War and has a marker, is the only Civil War veteran that has a marker. I understand that there are about 4 more Civil War veterans out there, but they haven't been able to get the information on them in order to mark their graves as veterans. So I don't know too much. However, I do remember Hattie Morrison's service because I was a preschool child. And then Grandpapa Morrison, though, died later than that, and I do remember him very well.
What was your father's occupation?
Rice farmer.
He was a rice farmer.
Mm-hmm. From Gaston, when I was 3, we moved just south of town here, and we were out about 2 miles south of town. That was a long ways back in that day.
Yeah.
I was 3 when we moved over there, and ran off to school a couple of times, a little country school that was just a half a mile from us. And, but I had a pet billy goat that would always get up on the wood pile and tattle. He'd just holler his head off when he saw me going down the road, and my mother would look out and see what in the world's the matter with Billy. And then I'd get retracted from going to school. But I did go to the little country school. Started there at 6, and I was there until we were 7 and a half.
Mm-hmm. Did you come into town then?
Yes.
Did the country school close, or was that where the grades were in town?
A little later.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, a little later. It was consolidated into Katy.
Mm-hmm.
But I have very vivid memories of my times going to that little country school. We went barefooted, and I accidentally ran a big old splinter right into the bottom of my foot, and no one could get it out. And I recall that my dad hitched up team to the wagon, and Mom and Papa took me into town to Dr. Stewart, and I don't know whether you've had Dr. Stewart mentioned in any of the interviews or not, but he was the first doctor here. And in fact, he's the doctor that brought me into the world. And I'm sure I had not seen a doctor since that time. But my parents brought me into town, and they used the same technique on me that we use on children now. We brag on them, how brave you are, and oh, you're wonderful, you're not even crying. And he cut the big splinter out of my foot. But it was a real important day in my life, because it's the only time I could remember of going anywhere without my 5 sisters and my 4 sisters and my brother. We always went everywhere as a family when it was time to go anywhere. But this is one time I rode all the way to town and back just with my parents. And I recall the little cookie box in the ditch, and got excited when I saw a lemon snap box, and because it would have paper dolls on it. And my dad stopped, and he got the box for me, and sure enough, it had paper dolls on it. Oh, that was something, because our paper dolls were like cut from the Sears and Roebuck catalog, the old Sears and Roebuck catalog. We always saved that, and there'd be a few colored pages in there, and we would use those for our paper dolls. But the other big event out at the school was when the first airplane came to Katy. And it was flying between us and town, and someone jumped up and ran to the window and said, "There's an airplane." Well, of course, everybody was looking out the window. And then they said, "Oh, it's going to land." And we all took out, running down the road. We didn't say, "Teacher, may we go?" or anything. We just all went. And the first graders could run faster than anybody. We got in the front. We just outran everyone. And then it wasn't landing. And some of the big kids came up to tell us that we better get ourselves back to school, and that we were going to get a whipping when we got back. They were always telling us things like that. So then we turned around and we ran past everybody getting back to school, and we couldn't find a place to hide. It was just a one-room school with 2 cloakrooms, And we'd say, "What are we going to do?" Well, the teacher got there, and she didn't even have it in her mind that she was supposed to paddle anybody, and these older kids had scared us to death. But that's what you experience when you are in a one-teacher room. The ones that are about the 7th grade know so much.
Or so they think.
So they think.
What's the first holiday or big family event that you remember? Big social activity with your family? Like maybe a Christmas or something like that?
Well, Christmas was very special. Yes. And back when I was believing in Santa Claus and hung up my stocking, my older sisters and brothers tried to see that I had something in my stocking, and I hung it up for several nights. It really wasn't a gift, because one gift was all, and mine was a doll that I got for every Christmas until I was about 8 or 9. And I remember when my mother said, "Now, this is your last dolly. You're getting too old for dolls." And I just thought the world had come to an end. But one gift was all we got. But my brothers and sisters would find something to put in that sock that I would hang up every night. I don't know how they managed it until I think there was an old funny paper that they even put in. I finally gave up. I thought, this is enough of Santa Claus.
They tried, though. What do you remember about the house you lived in as a child?
It was a two-story house, and I guess I remember going upstairs when the only paddling I ever had from my daddy was one day that I was sitting there wanting to iron. My mother would let me iron the handkerchiefs and the flat things. And every time she set the iron down, I was saying, "Is it my time to iron now?" And I guess my dad had decided that I'd interrupted enough their conversation, and he just turned me over his knee and gave me a couple of licks. And it was such a shock to me that I went upstairs and crawled under the bed to cry. And my sister Marjorie, that always took up for me and mommed me, came up there, and I was holding my breath under the bed trying to keep her from hearing me. But she said, "Now, Ruby, that's enough. You don't need to cry anymore. Come on out." And so I think she got me out. But for some reason, I can just remember that bed so vividly, crawling under this old bed to cry. And we did not have water piped into the home. But I remember on the back porch that we had a bucket with the dipper in it, and we had to go out to a windmill and catch our water out there and bring it in. I can't remember too much about that home.
Where was your house located?
What was that?
Where was your house located?
At that time, a mile or about 2 miles south of Katy. And when I was in the second grade, though, that's when we moved into Katy. And we lived in a house over there, right, it was on East Avenue. The house it was a two-story house at that time, but it's been torn down, made into a one-story house. And then we didn't live there but about 6 months until we lived on Roberts Avenue, which is named for my dad. It was a two-story house and large enough that we kept boarders. And back at the time when they were trying to put in electricity in Katy and gas lines, there were so many men working here that had to have a place to board, and my mother would take in boarders. And my older brothers and sisters were gone by that time, and I was almost into high school, but I would help my mother with cooking for them and buying the groceries, and getting home early after school to help with that, and up early in the morning to help fix lunches. And it was a very popular eating place in town. Everybody wanted to come there because they liked my mother's cooking, and she was a good cook. But of course, the men that worked here really had no movies or anything like that to go to, and they had to work on Sundays most of the time. And their recreation was playing 42 at night. And when my sister that's just older than Aline was there, well, Aline and I both would play 42. So that was recreation back in those days.
What do you view as the biggest change in Katy since your childhood? What do you think the biggest difference is between growing up here today and growing up when you grew up?
Modern conveniences, for one thing. we take so many things for granted now, the comforts that we have in our homes. And when I was a young child living out at the farm, my dad very often would come into town on Saturdays just to get a block of ice and to buy whatever groceries, And it was a big treat because we would have homemade ice cream. See, we had our own milk and eggs and things like that. And if we were careful and took care of the sugar, well, we'd have that homemade ice cream on Saturdays. And, ice cream is just so common now.
Yeah.
We don't think of that as being a special treat, but it was to us. And I would say the comforts in most of the homes, it would be very difficult if we had to go back to no refrigeration. No deep freezes, no air conditioning, and running water, indoor plumbing. That's one of the biggest changes I think we would find.
What are the first thoughts you can remember about first going to school?
Well, the first day of school, I was so thrilled to go, but I was embarrassed that day. When we lived in Gaston, where I was born, there were only about 3 houses over there, and our house was painted white, and everybody spoke of it as being the White House. And as a child, and I had never heard it called anything else except when we lived at the White House. And I started to school, and that first day of school, the teacher asked first graders, "Now, do you know where you were born?" And my hand went up. I knew where I was born. And I said, yes. And she asked me, and I said, well, because there was another little girl that was born in Oklahoma. But I said, well, I was born in the White House. And you can imagine how the 7th graders enjoyed that. And my older brothers and sisters went home and told Mama, said, "Mama, guess what Ruby said in school today?" So, times have changed. All the children nowadays that have a TV or any news with the outside world know what the White House is. But that happened my first day of school.
Did you go to kindergarten?
Oh, no. No, there was no kindergarten. Even in Katy, I don't believe there was a kindergarten until about 1951 or 2.
Probably something like that. How far was your school from your house?
Well, then, out in the country was about a half a mile. And then here in town, when we lived over here on Roberts Avenue, I don't know, 3/4 of a mile, I walked to school. Except in real bad weather, real bad. I guess I always walked to school as a child, but after I got up in high school, we had a Model T. And my dad would come driving up there to get me when the weather was just real severe.
About how many students were there in your school?
When I graduated, there was a class of 13. The miraculous part about that is I graduated in 1928, and in 1978, we celebrated our golden anniversary, and all 13 were present.
Really?
That was a record. No other class has ever had that honor of having all of its members still living and come present for the Katy High School alumni. and it was great. Since that time, though, we've lost about 4 out of my class.
What were your favorite subjects in high school?
Yeah, I loved math. I just couldn't stand it if I had a problem in trigonometry or anything, that if I couldn't work it, I would sit up with that old coal oil lamp working on it until maybe 1 o'clock at night. I loved math, and I loved homemaking.
It's interesting because a lot of people you run into, a lot of the women especially, weren't real fond of math, but math has always been one of my favorites. I don't know, because I like the problem-solving part of it.
Yes, it's a challenge to solve a problem.
How many rooms did your school have when you came into Katy?
When I first started up there, we were in the old 2-story brick, and I think there were about 4 rooms down and 4 up, something like that. And yeah.
What do you remember as being some fun times from your childhood?
4th of July picnic, which we would go down into the woods, and they'd have all kinds of contests, you know.
Was that a town event for the whole town?
Oh yes, town event. Family, everybody went down there to see what was going on, and I can remember they had red soda water, and I don't know whether they sold any kind of food or not. We really didn't have too much spending money, or whether it was I think more or less a picnic type thing where, you know, you spread your dinner. Yeah, 4th of July was real important.
That was a big one.
There weren't many school parties, but the ones we had were lots of fun.
What do you remember as being some of the more disappointing times of your childhood?
More disappointing times? Well, I didn't get to play on the first team of the basketball, girls basketball, as much, and part of that was due to the fact that I'd go home to help my mother, you know, with with getting ready for the boarders that night. I had to do the shopping. I'd drive over town, take the Model T over town, and pick up the groceries and help her. Part of it was due to that, and I was just sort of a substitute. You know, and I guess maybe, I don't know whether you know what it's like to sit on the bench.
Yeah.
That was a little disappointing.
Yeah.
But nothing big.
Yeah. What did you usually do during your summer vacations?
The highlight would be to go into Houston for about 2 weeks to stay with aunt and uncle. My mother's brother, Melvin Case, lived in Houston. He had 3 children, and the middle one, girl, Florence May Case, was my age. And that was something big to go. They lived on the Heights. We'd ride the streetcar and go downtown, and on each Saturday that we're there, Uncle Melvin would give each one of us a quarter to spend. And we would go to Cress's, and you could actually buy something with a quarter in those days. Yeah, that, and just last week I went to the funeral of the oldest one of these cousins. All 3 cousins have passed away now. But I really think about, and they would come out and spend a couple of weeks with us out in the farm.
How was the life different when you'd stay in the city there?
well, like I say, riding a streetcar was one thing different. And we would usually take in one movie,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and that was about 10 cents sometimes.
Did you usually get up at the same time or sleep longer, or didn't much difference?
Well, not a lot of difference there.
Mm-hmm.
My aunt took care of Mason Lodge Hall, and she'd take three of us, the middle cousin and the young cousin and myself, the three of us, we would walk with her about 8 blocks or so up to this lodge hall and help her with all the dusting and cleaning up and everything like that, and then back home, and that was a big, you know,
Big event.
it was something. And yeah, it was different being down there in the city where there were kids next door to play with.
Mm-hmm.
And, she didn't have good old home butter like we did.
Mm-hmm.
And she bought this oleomargarine that was white, and it would have a little envelope of yellow coloring, and you'd let the oleo sit out and get a little soft, and you dump this coloring in there, and then you'd beat that all up and make it yellow. And so that's one thing I remember that was different.
Did you have any kind of jobs when you were in high school, or just helping your mother?
Yes, back